Another edition of the Dean Legge Show. I'm sure everyone's clamoring for this one. This week, Georgia plays LSU in another top 10 matchup for the Bulldogs. Their third of the year. A lot of programs probably won't play 3 top 10 programs in a matter of 4 weeks or 5 weeks, whatever it is. But Georgia will. And this time, the Bulldogs host LSU, a program that, quite frankly, at this second, is very similar to Georgia in a lot of ways. Very powerful running back, pretty good quarterback, defense that could probably use a little bit of slowing down the opposition. But nonetheless, these two teams, obviously the big thorn in both of their sides the last couple of seasons has been Alabama. Neither of these two teams, these two teams are both one win away, or however you want to put it, from winning the national championship, and the only thing that's gotten in their way is Alabama. And that's Alabama's gotten a lot of people's way through the last couple of years. But this week, if you're Georgia, you don't have to win this game if you're talking about the SEC. But it'd probably help give yourself a little leeway between you and South Carolina, or you and Florida, whoever you want to call it. South Carolina's going to need a little help from Georgia, and this is one of the games that I think they think the Bulldogs could lose. But that's yet to be seen. I think the odds makers have this game as Georgia being a 3-point favorite, which is probably about right. Which that line means the two teams are similar, or very even, and I think that's the case. The question there's a lot of stuff going on this week. One thing I want to touch on before anything else is this week today actually, which is Wednesday, Paul Oliver, an old Georgia cornerback from the teams in 2005 and 2006. It looks like he's committed suicide. That's what the apparent cause of death is. It's really sad. Paul was one of the guys that when I was really starting to come around covering Georgia a lot in 2003 and 4, in that ballpark there, the early part of the 2000s, Paul was one of the first guys that you sort of met. Now, he redshirted his first year at Georgia, but by the time he left in 2006, he was really coming along in a big way. He had some academic issues that led to him leaving Georgia after the 2006 season. And I just think with Paul, the sad thing is it's what his life could have been in a lot of ways. Not on the football field necessarily, but I've had a close friend that has killed themselves in suicide. And that has got to be very difficult for everyone involved, and I'm thinking about not just Paul's family, but Paul. Everything, he was, I liked Paul. I never had a problem with Paul at all, and I just think it's really sad, and I think that some of Paul's good friends were in that first class that I really covered, which was the class of 2003 at Georgia, and that was guys like Des Williams, Fernando Velasco, Nick Jones. It was that group there that he was playing with, and he was backup for Tim Jennings and Demario Mentor, and that secondary was very good. And Paul was going to be the next star, really, at Georgia. What he did to Calvin Johnson in 2006 was very impressive. But I was thinking about Paul, and it's just really sad. It's not much, I didn't know Paul on a personal level the way I knew some of the guys back in the day, but it's really tough, and we got to figure out why these things happen. If he did commit suicide, we got to figure out why. Was it a concussion thing? Was it a mental illness thing? I think that that's something that is important, and I think that needs to be discussed and figured out. Okay, so thinking about Paul and his family, he had a wife and some children, I believe. So we'll talk about it now, But in 6 years, Paul will be gone, and everybody else will still be here. That's the thing that people forget about. Is it's how sad it is today. It's not just sad today. It's sad today, and it's sad for the remainder of his kids' lives. Okay, Georgia, LSU. We've got some Dean Legge Show questions. We'll just start off, and I'll just kind of take them from there. Georgia, LSU has 2 great wide receivers, but not much else at the position. Do you think Swan and Langley will play a lot of press coverage on them with safety help over the top? It's hard to know. But yeah, I don't know about press coverage necessarily. I don't know. Swan might, but like you say, LSU's got a couple of kids that can really go on the outside. And Zach Mettenberger, I'll talk about Zach too. He's met Zach a long time ago too. But they really have some very good receivers and a skilled running back who is a bruiser. That beginning of the game against Auburn for LSU, they were shot out of a cannon. After that, they looked a lot more pedestrian, particularly in the second half. I don't know if they lost concentration or if it was the rain or if, what. That wasn't a typical LSU crowd. I think LSU is very good. They have a brutal schedule. Nobody does these guys any favors ever. They play the Gators every year. This year they get Georgia. Obviously, they play at, I believe it's at Alabama this coming year. They'll host Texas A&M. They'll play Mississippi as well. So they'll play every ranked team in the SEC except South Carolina. That is rough. Nobody in the SEC has that tough a schedule. But I think that they kind of let off the pedal quite a bit against Auburn. We don't really know LSU the way we know Georgia. We've seen Georgia on the road against a top 10 team. We've seen Georgia at home against a top 10 team. We understand what Georgia is. And I think what Georgia is a high-scoring team that is slowly getting better at defense, but it's not going to stop teams like LSU completely. So they're going to have to win a shootout. They couldn't do that against Clemson. That was on the road. Let's see what happens at home. Here's a question from Stalking Dog about James DeLoach. What will his status be for Saturday? It looks like James DeLoach is not going to play. He came out of that game. He walked right past me. I think it was in the second quarter or late in the first quarter. Georgia takes concussions very, very seriously. And the poster goes on to say his size would be helpful against LSU in this physical ground game. I think that's a good point. I think that's a very good point, actually. But I don't think James is going to go. Georgia, again, takes concussions super seriously. We'll see how that goes. Swanee Dog 03 says, do you expect to see a rotation on the defensive line similar to what we saw against North Texas? I think we're going to see a fair amount. I don't know if we can say for sure that the rotation will be exactly the same, but I think this is what people, against North Texas, is a little bit what people thought would happen, which is a lot more guys plays Chris Mays. Toby Johnson's been in there quite a bit. But I think when you're playing LSU, Georgia's basically looking in the mirror, and they're going to have to be physical. They're going to have to play a lot of guys. They're going to have to get after the quarterback. Zach Mettenberger is not a mobile quarterback. So if you get in his face, you're going to have to hit him, though. You can't just get in his face. Dude is huge. So you're not just going to be able to just hit him. You got to hit him. You're not going to be able to just scare him. That's the thing about Zach. He's going to stand in there and make throws. But, they'll roll him out a little bit, but not a lot. That's not what his skill set is. His skill set is to be in the pocket. So they're going to have to get in his face. They're going to have to just win. You're going to have to win one-on-one battles. It's that simple. Here's a further question from Swanee, and it says, if Georgia pulled out the victory, will it finally shut the quote-unquote experts about Aaron Murray and the entire Georgia program not being able to win the big games? Listen, I don't know. No, it won't, because this is what happens in the media. Okay, I've been in the media for, I think, 13 or 14 years. What happens is the media is not very smart sometimes, or a lot. However you want to put it. I don't hate the media. I'm just pointing out there is a particular narrative, and the media reflects society. Most of society doesn't have the ability to think in terms of complicated notions. They assume that because something's happened, it cannot happen any other way, or they think that something that happened 4 years ago has something to do with what happened today. For instance, Georgia's 13 and whatever, or 3 and 12 when ESPN Game Day comes. Well, that has nothing to do with anything. That has nothing to do with anything at all. And if you're sitting there screaming at the computer saying, yes, it does. Well, you just don't, you know what we're talking about. It's very simple. When you play a good team, you might lose. If game day were in Athens for the North Texas game, Georgia was going to win. If game day was not in town for the LSU game, it was still a difficult game. I mean, why do we just refuse to use logic? So, Georgia in their last 4 games against top 10 opponents is 2-2. That's better than a lot of teams do, frankly. So, the fact is that this is an SEC game. Georgia needs to win it. It doesn't derail their Eastern Championship hopes. If they do lose it, they just got to be perfect from that point forward, and they can't lose the Florida game. So they can't lose the Florida game anyway. So it doesn't change anything. But as it relates to Aaron Murray, no, the die is cast, and it has nothing to do with reality. It's just the way that it is. The media can, in a lot of ways, this is a 30-second world on television. You don't have the ability to explain yourself. You can't have a 30-minute show talking about Aaron Murray. You can only speak in quick generalities. Fact is often not used, and that's the problem. But we live in a TV world, and in the TV world, that's you deliver 30-second bites, and that's it. I mean, that's how it goes. So, will the narrative change? No, but they'll figure out something else. I mean, we live in a world where you get credit for doing something until you don't do it, and that's just how it goes. And the narrative right this second is that Aaron Murray can't win the big game, even though he just won 2 of them in the last probably 8 games Georgia's played. So what can you say? Is Jordan Jenkins at the point where offenses are having to scheme against him the way that they did with Jarvis, or do you think there's a big drop off from Jarvis to Jenkins? I don't think they're scheming against Jordan yet, but I think that, and I do think there's a drop off, but I don't know that it's a big one. I think Jordan Jenkins is probably going to be an All-SEC, if not an All-American kid by the time he gets done at Georgia. But, I mean, Jarvis was a first-round pick. I think Jordan can be a first-round pick. But we're seeing Jordan, at a little younger age than we saw Jarvis. Jarvis was 3 years into college football by the time people saw him play. This is Jordan's second year. So there's some of that. But, I mean, you're about to ask about Leonard Floyd. And, the question is Leonard's success partly due to teams being more focused on Jordan? I mean, that's hard for me to say definitively yes. I just think they're both very good, but they're different. Jordan's bigger, Leonard's long and lean and has the ability to dip that shoulder the same way Jordan can. Georgia's very fortunate, and you're allowed to do this, to have recruited 2 players as good as those 2 guys at a position that's very important. If the most important position on the field for the offense is the quarterback, probably the most important position for the defense is the person who rushes the passer, whether that be the outside linebacker or that's the defensive end. It depends what you're on a 3-4-3. Back in the day when Georgia was running 4-3, that's why you had the best players were defensive ends, whether it was Marcus Howard, David Pollock, Quentin Moses, Will Thompson even. I mean, just enter the name of anybody, Charles Grant. So the guy that pressures the most important offensive player was the most important defensive player. Now it's shifted. It's the outside linebacker, Justin Houston, Jarvis Jones, Leonard, Jordan. So the dynamic has changed. But the point is, your better players are people. Your best players on the team are the people who influence the best player on the other side, or the most important player, which is always the quarterback. So that's what you're trying to do, is disrupt quarterbacks. When you disrupt quarterbacks, you're going to win. It's that simple. And Georgia's not really done a great, it's not been one of these things where you're like, oh man, they can't stop them. But part of that, if not a lot of that, is that you've seen mobile quarterbacks with Clemson and South Carolina. That poor kid from North Texas was getting killed, and he was not a mobile quarterback. Zach Mettenberger's not a mobile quarterback. That's the other thing I'd watch for in this game. Todd Grantham has had a harder time adjusting to college-based offenses. I think that his defenses have performed much better against pro style. I'm just saying those off my head. I could be completely wrong, but I don't think so. They perform a lot better against sort of non-spread, non-mobile quarterback teams. So in other words, what my theory is that they play a little better against pro style offenses, not against these quasi sort of strange mobile quarterbacks. I think they played pretty well against the kid at Missouri last year, but I'm curious to see because we have a not greatly mobile quarterback for LSU, and he's not going to be able to slip the pocket the way Shaw and Boyd did for Clemson and South Carolina. So we'll see how that goes. Why does LSU always look so big? Because they are always so big. LSU, Alabama, traditionally are two of the bigger teams in the SEC. South Carolina has become huge on defense. Georgia is not small by any stretch. And you see those teams are pretty physical. Tennessee, back in the day, they used to be very physical. There's a talent issue in Knoxville right now, and that's probably a problem. Is their color scheme or their uniforms smaller? No, but they do wear white all the time, and white is not very slimming. So, fashion tip. Is J.J. Green the kick returner, or was that just for the North Texas game? I think that was just for the North Texas game. But J.J. Green's an interesting, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on J.J. Green because he's a third, he's probably the fourth string running back. And not a lot of people watching this are going to really get into J.J. Green. But J.J. Green is going to make his impact on special teams. And it could be punt return. It could be kick return. You saw the speed at running back. I just don't think he's a every down running back by any stretch. But he is a Tyson Browning. He is Thomas Flowers. He is, and they're by the way, that's not an insult. These are not insults. That's what you want. When you've got 85 players, you want Mikey Henderson. So let's just give JJ a little bit of time. Let him concentrate on special teams. Is he a running back next year? Do you want to be the number 6 running back? I mean, Todd, Keith, Marshall, Todd, Gurley, Marshall, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, Brendan, Douglas. I mean, do you want to be the number 6? Maybe not, but there's a long way away, and I just think you let the kid return punts and kicks and so forth. Here is one from Big Band Man, and he's got sort of a lot of the people on Dog Post do this. They have multi-pronged questions. Wants me to compare Georgia to LSU in the following 3 ways. His premise is, my opinion is the winner of this game can be found in the following areas. My guess, I've not read it yet. My guess is going to be these are pretty basic things, and that's probably the best way to look at it. The team with the best offensive and defensive line play. Okay, so I think for the most part, LSU and Georgia are very similar in those areas. The Georgia offensive line is somewhat similar to the LSU offensive line, vice versa on defense. Georgia just maybe a bit deeper on defense, although it's with guys that have just hardly ever played. LSU's got a couple of line sort of issues in terms of injuries coming into the game, so that will be curious. So that's basically even. Team who has the fewest turnovers or major mental mistakes, obviously it's impossible to predict what will happen in terms of turnovers and so forth. The LSU defense is just not dominant like it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So right there, that's hard to know. A team who is accustomed to playing its best under pressure against the best competition. Well, if that's the criteria, then Georgia's played under pressure twice for sure. LSU, I think everybody thought they'd roll Auburn, which is what happened. It was kind of a lazy effort at times, but they beat Auburn up pretty good. and then they beat TCU the beginning of the season. The question is with the TCU game, is TCU any good? That's what, after that loss to Texas Tech, that wasn't the greatest, most awe-inspiring moment on earth. But you can't compare Saturdays to Saturdays, particularly that far apart in the season. I mean, that's coming on 5 weeks ago when those two teams played. So, I mean, if it's about who's playing the bigger game, it's definitely Georgia on that front. But, to me, Georgia wins this game, but it's tight. And the reason I say that is because, I really thought LSU, I think Georgia matches up fine with them. Georgia can score a lot of points. And I think a couple of things here. First of all, I think the SEC in this year may be about offense more than it is defense. I mean, if you look at Georgia, Alabama, Texas A&M, LSU, and even South Carolina, their defenses are not as good as they once were. Okay, now I can't really speak to A&M. They've been in the league once. The other four, they're down on defense. But Alabama has scored more than 45 points in a conference game. Excuse me, let's just put it like Georgia has scored more than 40 points in an SEC game. Alabama has scored more than 40 points in an SEC game against a legitimate foe. Those two. A&M has scored more than 40 points in an SEC game against a legitimate foe. LSU has scored, I think it was a lot of points against Auburn. Okay, you can call them a legitimate foe if you want to. So my thing is, Florida is going to have to rely on defense. That to me means the Gators are in a little bit of trouble. South Carolina is having to rely more on their offense. That didn't work out great for them against Georgia. And if South Carolina's defense was so good, why did they allow 40 whatever it was points against for Georgia? So that that's the thing for me. If this is becoming an offensive league, and it sure looked like it when Alabama and A&M played one another, it sure looked like it when South Carolina and Georgia were playing each other. I mean, those are four teams that a lot of people said they can win this conference. Well, they're all scoring 40 points against each other. So if it's about that, then that's why I think Georgia wins this game against LSU. Now, let me say this too. I mean, obviously it would not surprise me to see LSU come out with a win, a 10-point win, 3-point win, 1-point win. I mean, LSU's legit. They always are. The other thing about this LSU-Georgia thing is these two get together. They have just these nutty games. I mean, 1998, Quincy Carter, Champ Bailey show. They win by a point down there in Baton Rouge. Come to 1999, allegedly LSU fans break into Sanford Stadium, do donuts. Georgia has to save themselves with Will Witherspoon in the end zone, knocking a ball away on a 2-point conversion. Georgia wins by 1. 2003, Georgia ties the ball game with, I think it was a minute to go, or whatever it was, with Tyson Browning on a 93-yard screen pass for a touchdown, 10-all. LSU, with about a minute or 30 seconds left, whatever it was in the game, comes down and scores, and it's 17-10. Skylar Green. Later that year, SEC championship with it all on line for LSU. LSU plays great, and I would say they blew out Georgia. That was a pretty good beating. The next game, 2004, Georgia absolutely throttles Nick Saban and LSU, beats them very bad. And then in 2005, Georgia beats LSU in the SEC championship game. That was a pretty good beating as well. That was when Les Miles was the head coach there. LSU was number 3 in the country. 2008, Georgia goes down to Baton Rouge and wins just a total track meet, but they beat them up pretty good. 2009 was a total circus, and Athens comes down. It's just like the 2003 game. Georgia scores late to win. Looks like they've won the ball game. LSU comes down late to win it. 2011, Georgia gets up on them. They were winning in the third quarter, and then they just fell apart completely. That team was just that showed the immaturity of of the program at that moment. We're a long way from that time for both LSU and Georgia. So this game turns on TV sets. Both of these teams, I expect a pretty high rating for LSU Georgia for CBS. I don't expect Auburn. I don't expect Bama A&M numbers, but it's going to be pretty high. I mean, the loser of this game, if it's Georgia, they're probably out of the national championship talk. I mean, that needs to be I think it needs to be stopped right now because it's so far away. You don't know what's going to happen. For LSU can lose this game and nothing changes. I mean, nothing changes for LSU. So, it's more important for Georgia in a lot of ways, but this is really, just one of those games you get in the conference sometimes. It's Florida, Alabama, it's Tennessee, Auburn. It's just kind of an odd game, and you don't see it a lot. But these two programs have been very good for a long time, and in a lot of ways they mimic one another. I mean, in 2007, who's to say Georgia wasn't the better team? I mean, I think a lot of people would argue they were the better team, even though they lost 2 games, and they both lost 2 games that year. Georgia lost in the middle of the season, and LSU lost the last game of the regular season. And the rules, of course, have changed. Georgia didn't get the benefit like Alabama did, and didn't get the benefit like Nebraska did of not winning the division. That was the argument used against that 2007 Georgia team, was that they didn't win their division. Well, nobody seemed to care about that when Nebraska played for the national championship, and nobody certainly seemed to care about that at all 2 years ago when Alabama played for the national championship. So Georgia got a little bit jobbed in that whole deal, I have to say. But, we live in the world that we live in, and, these two teams will play one another in a very consequential game. But they could play one another again. Now, let's not forget about that part. LSU has to go to Alabama. That's going to be tricky, but they can win that game. And then Georgia has to stay clean the rest of the way. If they win this game, Georgia's probably going to win the East. And, the Gators are going to have to beat Georgia down there in Jacksonville. They're just season-ending injuries is absurd what's going on at Florida right now. That's going to be a tough task for Florida. But that's a long way away, and it's a month away, and we'll just see what happens then. But anyhow, one of the longer Dean Legge shows. We're going to wrap it up right now. Georgia LSU, I think it kicks at 3:41 on CBS Saturday.